Thanks. Am I good? I'm good. So I'm going to start out. Obviously, my name's Ara T. Howard. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I run a small, my display isn't mirrored correctly here, so I'm going to be looking over my shoulder, but I run a small, well, recently much smaller boutique software agency. We build all fashion of applications that touch the internet, mobile, web, big data, in support of impact companies. Our definition of impact is companies who are working to create a world where no one is limited by circumstance. That's sort of our definition of what impact is. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all for social good, it doesn't make money, but it's just trying to level the playing field for all people on the planet. It's a very broad definition. Our company's in Boulder, Colorado. A couple of you people have been to here. We're a semi-open workspace for friends and friends of friends, so it's an open invitation for anybody who's in Colorado to stop by and visit us, hang out, hack, work. It's a great trip. So just a little bit about myself. I've been in the Ruby community for a very long time, since before Ruby 1.4, long before Rails. There was a time when I was a prolific code writer. I have maybe 150 or something like that gems released into the community at this point. And I've seen really Ruby go through some profound changes, and that's kind of what I'm here to talk to you about today. One of the changes, the specific change I'm going to speak to you about is I think how the development community at large, and Ruby in particular, I think has become maybe a little more small-minded than they were initially. And I'm going to encourage you to consider that a lot of the things that we talk about, we obsess about, we think about, may actually be the wrong things, and really to try to remind people that programming is a super powerful thing, and that everyone in this room actually has a big responsibility to do something with that power. Just want to start out by asking a show of hands, like, how many people think the world economy would not collapse in 3 days if every software developer in the world stopped going to work? No hands. So this is what I'm talking about, and yet I think inside the development community, the things that we really do argue about in front of whiteboards, stay up at night worrying about, debate inside of our companies and at conferences, they may not actually be the right things. So I guess I'll preface the rest of this talk by saying I've slept 8 hours in 3 days. I'm on a big time change from Colorado, so I fucking hate flying, I fucking hate conferences, and I fucking hate public speaking. So you may wonder why I'm here, and this is because this is something of a personal and professional mission right now, to talk to as many people as we can about what I see as an existential crisis in software. So I'm going to tell a story. I'm the guy in the middle, always a Linux guy. And I'm going to start this talk by, I guess this didn't quite fit on there, but to start this talk about, and the whole talk is going to be a story, basically, of my journey. And I'll start out with RubyConf 2006, which was in Denver. It's the first RubyConf that I attended. I think when I was there, I was one of 3 people to raise my hand and say that I was paid full-time to program in Ruby. It's quite some time ago. I remember, I take that back, that was actually the previous RubyConf, but at this Ruby conference, I was still on a Linux laptop, and what I witnessed at that RubyConf was, I think, something that was a little bit of the beginning of the end. At that time, I never had a Windows machine. I came from the Linux hacking community, where there was really a deep belief at that time that through open source and through software, like, we could actually change the world, right? Like, code had power. There was this deep revolutionary belief in what we were doing. And this, I believe, was the moment when that began to change, I think, for a majority of developers, in a majority of developers' minds. And I think this guy on the left is the problem, and I have one of these now. But I remember sitting there at RubyConf, and there was a guy in front of me. Some of you may know him. He's a little bit of a nut in the Ruby community, Austin Ziegler. I'm not even sure if he's really still active in the community, but he had a Mac, and it was like the first MacBook. And it was the first time DHH was speaking at this RubyConf, and I remember it was like the first time where suddenly like Ruby programming had this aura of being cool, right? It wasn't just about making computer programs. It was not just about trying to change the world through open source or being nice or any of those things. It was also cool for the first time. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I fucking want one of those computers. So at the time, again, you know, I was not in the startup space. I was not doing corporate work. I was research faculty at the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Earth Sciences. It's a super cool job. At the time, I had was helping to build what was the largest supercomputer in the world at that time for 5 days or something until it was eclipsed. And and after that, I was doing some really cool Ruby work, also supercomputing work and big data, truly big data, as in petabytes of data, visualizations and analysis with Ruby, which was kind of groundbreaking at the time. We were working with the Nighttime Lights group. So the DMSP satellites it's a set of polar orbiting satellites, and the really interesting property that they're the only remotely sensed data set that measures man. There's no data set where you can run a filter or do an analysis to say that's a person. People know that, you know, you can fly these crazy satellites and see the color of the hair on the back of your head or whatever, but those satellites need to be programmed to acquire data. The volume of data is so big, they're not continuously collecting it. The DMSP satellites continuously polar orbit. There's 3 of them. Their orbits stripe and overlap. They collect data over the world, and it's used for real-time tactical air decisions. So we did a lot of pretty shit work, like over Area 3 and Area 5. The data is classified for obvious reasons, used for making, Air Force real-time flight decisions. It has the cool property, however, that on the back side of the world, the dark side, they just chuck that data. So my group was the official archive for this data, and so we got a ton of money for doing some stuff I didn't really feel that great about, still don't feel that great about. But what we did on the side was a little bit of a Robin Hood play where we would take this information and we would do things like be able to measure the extent of the storms after Hurricane Katrina for the White House. Right, you think about like a natural disaster. No information gets out of a natural disaster. There's no other way to measure it. We would do things like measure the location of refugee camps, in the Saharan desert, so that food drops could go in and but not reveal the location of those refugee camps to the opposing side so that they could be bombed. And we would do things like measure the total CO2 emitted into the atmosphere through gas flaring to the intensity of the light, which, by the way, is actually equivalent to like all the gasoline burned in cars per day. So we felt kind of good about that. And I felt good about that work. I felt like I was making a positive contribution, robbing from Peter to pay Paul, but it was a fun time. But there was that fucking Mac laptop. I think by the time RubyConf 2007 rolled around, it was really just about these 2 guys, right? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and no one was really thinking about Linus in the Ruby community anymore, really that sort of zeitgeist. So we were hooked. About that time, I was contacted by what now we would call, so I live in Boulder, Colorado. My office is in something called Startup Alley. There's 30 startups within like 3 blocks of us. When I moved into that office, there were no startups. I didn't even know what the word startup was. I didn't know what venture capital was. I just knew about writing software. So about this time, I was contacted by what now is known to be a startup that was acquired by Oracle. And they contacted me out of the blue with the bizarre mission of, they were still in Windows, of compiling the GNU scientific library so that it would run in the Ruby one-click installer. And that was where I took the bait, basically. So I quit my job and I started contracting. It was really cool. I started doing these things called web applications. I remember telling a good friend of mine at the time, before I did this, like, why would anybody ever want to build fucking web applications? Like, that is just shit work. That's like Perl CGI guys, right? It's not real programming. But that was the beginning for me. So I started working for them and quit my job in research, became a consultant, did that for about 5 years, and looking back now realized that I was helping to build many of the startups that have been acquired in Boulder ever since, and I was part of the machine. So, I should have moved to that one just then, but yeah, I was drinking the Kool-Aid, right? I was fully hooked and engaged in doing something that I now question with some suspicion. So most continue to be like a pretty good place for me. I made a lot of money, met a lot of people, super fun. I was able to start a company, Dojo 4, which is my current company. We were able to bring a group of people together and really create what is a pretty good lifestyle. We live in a fantastic place. Boulder's amazing. We have super cool people. We enjoy what we do. It's kind of cake, right? So it seems like everything should be good. But I started getting this like nagging sensation that I wasn't really compelled by the work that I was doing. I started at night laying there thinking, man, do I really have to fucking build that same user system again, or that same voting system, or that same feature that every startup has? Everything started seeming very much the same. Every startup that came in was asking for essentially the same thing. It started feeling very incestuous and without purpose. So we started having these discussions internally in the company beginning of last year. You know, everything's great, but why are we doing this? Like, is it worth it? Should we do something else? And software is hard, right? These are important questions to ask, because it's not like it's an easy job. It's not like it's a stress-free job, but we really started wanting more. So this guy was also in the back of my mind at the time. How many people know who this is? That's fantastic. I wonder if that's, I'm a very long ways from home. I gave this talk in a room of 300 people 2 weeks ago, and I asked that same question, and 0 people raised their hand. It was shocking to me. I think it's and maybe only 30% raised their hand here. Who is that, by the way? Somebody want to say like why he's important to the open source community? Like, what do we know now? What's that? No foundation. Well, I mean, he wrote a lot of software, but this guy, I was thinking about him, and I was remembering like when I was a Linux hacker, he wrote a lot of manifestos. Like, he was a crazy motherfucker is a crazy motherfucker for all intents and purposes. And at the time, he seemed genuinely crazy. He was talking about things like why open source software is important for things like privacy, and why it could be a force to fight against government surveillance of your communications, just as an example. Everyone thought he was crazy. It's interesting, if you don't know who he is, or if you even do, this spider sense was like ringing in my ear, and you go back and you read like some of the things he was saying, and what you discover is it was all fucking right. Every single thing was right. He may not have been the best steward. It wasn't candy coated, I know, perhaps enough. It wasn't sexy enough. It didn't come wrapped with a little Apple icon on it. It wasn't aluminum, and there was no stock options. However, everything he said was right, and I think people have forgotten it. In fact, we know now that simple decisions like people in this room make, like contributing to open source software so that we have, cryptography libraries that aren't controlled by governments or corporations, turns out that's kind of important. Like, incredibly important and could affect millions of lives. And big ideas like freedom, like it's kind of crazy. No one talks about this anymore in software. So these things are rumbling around in my head. Stallman, what the fuck are we doing? What are we making? Same thing over and over. And then I learned about Africa. I got invited to, it's a great album, by the way, if everybody doesn't know this album. So I got invited to go to a conference that was hosted by the Unreasonable Institute. So the Unreasonable Institute, if people don't know who they are, they don't have anything to do with software. They're an accelerator, an incubator, this kind of thing. They're the one whose definition of impact I co-opted, right? A world where no one is limited by their circumstance. And they co-opted it from somebody else. But their whole mission is to facilitate this, and their whole belief is that governments can't do it, NGOs can't do it, only business can do it. This is not about charities, right? It's not about giving money. It's not about legislation. It's that business can solve the world's problems. That's a really fundamentally new idea, right? I think a lot of times in software we think about, a very bifurcated concept between we donate our time to open source, we work for free for charities, we have Hackfest to help our cities, and then we work to make money and doing shit that a lot of us might not care about that much. So this is a really new idea, and it took a long time for me to actually accept it. When I went there as a technical mentor, and it was a 2-week program. We worked 17 hours a day. It was insane. We were all at a camp, sleeping in teepees in this incredible vineyard, about 250 people. And we were working with 10 companies, and these companies were selected for their impact on adolescent women. The program was a partnership with Nike. So these are companies, right, not charities. And they're chosen because their product directly had a positive impact on adolescent women. So I won't go into the details of why that was, but I will tell you that none of the companies were doing anything that you think that they might be doing. So for example, one of them is a banking application, mobile banking. The fuck does that have to do with adolescent women? It's well, if you happen to be building that application in a country where the 85% of the population has no access to banking, and the primary way of moving cash is to give a kid the money and have them get on a bus, that happens to be a pretty dangerous job, then you're having an impact on them. Or you make solar lights. Why does that impact adolescent women? Because in the countries that this country's operating in, which is 4 or 5 in Africa, women have less opportunity to do homework. They're expected to do the cleaning and cooking, and by the time they would have an opportunity to do their homework, it's dark. They have no electricity, so they can't do their homework. So really kind of interesting. I thought, hey, that's neat. It's great that they're doing that. But then some other things started creeping in. In 2 weeks working with 10 startups, no one said the word exit once. All the companies that we were working with, and these are companies that are operating in a place where the average consumer makes less than $2 per day, right? Poor countries. All these countries had revenues of 2.5 million or higher. So respectively, fucking killing it. Some of the companies have raised rounds since, actually, but all the companies were bootstrapped and at a smooth revenue curve. None of this we're gonna take a bunch of cash, we're gonna make up a problem, we're gonna solve it, and then as soon as we can just figure out the business model to do with this billions of dollars of software and data, we're gonna be rich. These guys didn't take the money, they were selling their product out of the gate. Huge technical innovations, right? The barriers that these companies they face are things like, I'm selling a light, but nobody has enough money and no way to pay me. So in addition to making a light, I have to design a microfinance company. I have to build an app that runs on feature phones, right? You remember the little LCD screens, right? Pre-smartphones and smartphones, so that people can pay me with micropayments. Oh shit, the local currency doesn't work, so I actually have to figure out how to do that with Bitcoin and other ways of arbitrage and go across countries. They're solving these problems with technology, right? Another example of some interesting technology that one of those companies had is a company that basically they solicit crafts, jewelry, clothing, art from women in the community, and these people are way in the middle of nowhere. So their platform is basically distributed supply chain, right? Like on a mobile phone. People promise to bring things. The whole thing's organized through technology. So every company had significant problems that we don't have, like I can pay anybody here with a phone or cash. I mean, we take this for granted. I can communicate with you. You have light. And they were solving a lot of these problems through technology. This is possible because just in the last few years, essentially you have an entire continent, and this is true elsewhere. Africa is just an example of this, but you have an entire continent where you have a shit ton of problems, unlimited problems, ineffective governments, ineffective NGOs. This exists elsewhere. It's not limited to Africa. And everybody now has the internet in their pocket, right? And a JavaScript engine. And this is like a profoundly important time where if you write a piece of software, your ability to impact like the entire world on, on this, that never existed before. Like that didn't exist before right now. The tipping point's here today, right? Like the mobile phone ownership, the opportunity is immense. And what I realized after digesting all this and working with these companies, it's like, whoa, this is actually working. They're making money. They're doing something that doesn't suck. They're doing incredibly cool technology. The engineering team is having fun. I mean, these are real challenges, right? Like, how do we build a payment system that works across these currencies, country boundaries, limited connectivity? So, super interesting problem and ability to make an impact. And I finally understood and developed a new definition of the word impact. It's called, if you have a fucking problem and I solve it, you buy it from me. You don't need marketing for this. Some people just call this good business. So the thing that I realized was, and I think the thing that's wrong with a lot of the startup community and the development community by side effect, is that people have forgotten that the fundamental criteria for having a successful business and engineering a solution is having a problem, right? Like you actually need a problem to solve to write code that has an impact. And the point of this talk, again, is just to encourage the people on the ground, the troops, that this is possible. Like there are plenty of problems. We don't have to be solving non-problems with what I think everybody agreed in the beginning of this conversation is one of the most powerful tools on the planet. Why are we solving non-problems with it? To make people more money? Like we don't make enough money? We're all probably, the wealthiest people in our neighborhood. That's your average software developer. Why are we doing this? We're not smart enough to like make another choice or have an impact. So what my company did when I came back from that is we talked about it for quite a while and then we fired everybody. Absolutely everybody. One day, walked in, we're done. Fired everybody, sorry. I wasn't as harsh as it sounds. I actually talked with all our engineers, all our designers, and all of our contractors, and I said, we're tired of building stupid shit. Like the sentiment when I started talking with everybody said, we want to do something meaningful. Every single person said some permutation of, that sounds great because I'm tired of building stupid shit. So we had some fundamental changes to our business model. All the people that we fired, except two, are back. We have a different organization now. But we jump with both feet. We also became a B Corp. This may or may not be interesting to people, but this is fundamentally the equivalent of fair trade coffee or organic certification for food. There's 1,300 B corporations in the world. They're basically committed to business transparency, having a social impact. It's not a nonprofit. They're about making money, but they're also committed to making a positive impact on the world, socially, environmentally, etc. So we did that, so it's quite rigorous. It's a 97-page application. It took us months and months to get through. We recently were certified. We're in a small club now of 1,300 B Corps in the world. It's been interesting since we did this, right? Like, we're still a software agency. It's the same people we were working with before. We now have companies like calling us up out of the blue, like, you're a B Corp, we're a B Corp, we're trying to solve this problem, let's work together. We have, where we used to get maybe 2 or 3 solicitations from software developers looking for work, we now get 20 or so per week, and we have people volunteering to do stuff at Dojo 4. I don't even know what that means in the software world, but in any case. So it's been a real change, culturally, cultural change, and focus. So, we're making a lot less money just because of the pivot in the business model. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but so far it's going pretty well. There are a lot of unknowns. We don't know where it's going to go long term, but we're all sleeping a lot better. We feel better about the work that we're doing. Still software. We're still like fucking debugging JavaScript and IE. I mean, it's the same job, but something's fundamentally different, and that's nice. So I have another talk after this one that I'm going to go over briefly, which is, I mean, it could be its own talk, but briefly, you know, like, what I'm trying to engage people to think about is that is to come along like on this journey with me, to think about what you're doing and how you can do something a little bit better with the power that you do have. So I think normally people have been stopping at the end of their talk to take questions, but I want to give some concrete ideas about how somebody could do this, how somebody could go on this journey inside the place that they already are. Meaning, maybe they don't own a company, maybe they're not going to fire everybody, maybe they can't quit their job, so maybe they can't work on open source. Like, how can you actually do something? I'd like to talk about that. Basically, just give a little mini talk right after that. But I thought I'd pause right here if anybody had any questions before that, and then I'll stop after that to take final questions. Anybody? So, yeah.
Two questions. First one is, you talked about catering, hurricane, and it's difficult to detect it, and when it is, it breaks the lives, yeah? And when it is during several hours, and it takes some really much area to break all houses, yeah, around. Mm-hmm. So if we use Internet of Things here, yeah? Yeah. We do not have internet connection, but with some things we can translate the signal from start to the hurricane,
yeah,
go to the place where we have internet connection, and send the signal to the system to understand where it starts. And after that, we can understand the way it would be.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you think it's possible, like, to use such a thing?
It's entirely possible. I mean, this is exactly sort of analogous to what happens in weather modeling now, where, for sure, I mean, the large meteorological organizations have data collection facilities all over the world, but increasingly it's like home weather plants that are home weather models that are collecting this information. And that's a perfect example of what a software developer could do right now. Like, what would you measure on a device that would go up into the cloud? I mean, you could do this now, store massive amounts of information that would allow you to say something about what's happening on the ground. You could do this. Somebody in this room could do this for probably a $200 a month Amazon bill.
Yeah. The second question, you say about, like, the way how we live. We trying to get earn money, and we try to do something to sell it, to get money for this. So even if there are no ask to have it, like users do not want to get it, yeah, the way is marketing, how we put it, and you should pay the money for it. Yeah, so this is like the way how we use technology now. Yeah, but if we think about scientific and mathematics and physics. Yeah. In mathematics, there are no such like rule that when we need something and we start investigate to solve the issue. Not.
Yeah.
We create instruments. And we even don't know for what we will create this instrument. In physics, when we in physics need something, we use mathematics already created instrument to solve this problem in physics. Because if we do not have such instrument in mathematics, we couldn't resolve it in physics. How do you think about such model for the IT?
I think this is similar to, it is similar to the open source model, I think in a lot of respects, there are some parallels to be drawn there, but I think that there's things that are in between, I think, and that's where the really exciting place is. It's not just all doing something, inventing something cool and hoping that there'll be a business model, and it's not necessarily just making a business model and then figuring out a money-making machine and then building the code around that money-making machine, that there's places in between. I think that's really the realization now is that, and in fact, I think one could say, a really good metric of are you having an impact is will somebody pay for it? Like the things are not diametrically opposed, right? It's okay to invent something with the goal of making money. That's a great way to narrow down the decisions you're making and to get market feedback that you're doing the right thing. I think it's more of a question of is the cart driving the horse or the other way around? It's a subtle distinction, to be sure. But I think most people see it as two ends of a spectrum now in business and in software, and that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. So briefly, just want to talk to people here, I think because this may seem like a little bit high level, unactionable, abstract, right, for somebody who's going to go to work tomorrow morning at 9. So I just want to give 3 sort of high level concepts for how you might start putting this into practice and to encourage you to believe that may actually have a bigger impact than you would think. So the first thing that I would say is just to position yourself to actually find real problems. So does that mean quitting your job and going to India or something? That's not what I mean, actually. I think very few of us don't have real problems within a 2-mile radius of where we work or where we live. It's not that hard to find real problems. Does it mean working for a charity, volunteering your time? It might. One of the things that we do at Dojo 4, we're on the board of Awesome Boulder. We give $1,000 a month to things that are 1, awesome, and 2, in Boulder. Those are the strings, basically. Sometimes they resemble charity, sometimes they resemble public art projects. But one of the things that's really interesting about that from a software perspective is just by being engaged in that, I see a lot of things that I don't see otherwise. So I think the value in getting engaged in some sort of volunteer work or charity is not that that's what you're doing with your time, it's that somebody will give you the problems for free. Right? They'll just tell you what the problem is. You don't have to be that creative. And by the way, you know how to use computers. That's helpful. So take what they're doing. They probably even have the solution. And where they could do a solution and they can turn it up to 2, you can say, well, I can turn it up to 2,000. Right? That's the power that you have with computing. So another way to find problems is to look at what's painful for you. Right? What do you hate? I was saying earlier, so I've written 100, 200 gems, something like that. And a lot of the most popular ones, one of my most popular gems of all time was a gem called RubyForge. I don't know if people remember RubyForge, but that's before Ruby Gems existed, and it was the only way you could publish shit, right? And it fucking sucked. It was so awful. You had to click all these buttons. And at some point I was like, really? Like, I have to do this every time just to give somebody my code? So I automated it. I built a robot. I think it's still my most popular gem of all time. So I just looked at something that like sucked for me. Like, this really hurts. I hate it. And you just fix it. Again, like, that's a real problem. If you hate doing something, you can be guaranteed that a lot of other developers also hate doing it. So fix it, and then move on to doing something bigger with your time, right? You're having an impact. You're letting somebody focus on something better than what they were focusing on before.
I'm sorry, Ara, you have 5 minutes maximum.
Okay. Another thing is to look at your group's pain. Twitter does code reviews like everyone else, their data science team, but they express them, they actually look at it not just in terms of the code, but as the person, right, actually being a little vulnerable. Those are the terms that they look at it. So in other words, looking at the opportunity in your work for being a little more human. Like, it's actually hard to like present something you're unsure of, especially in a group of engineers who are always right. It's maybe not that comfortable, right? Maybe you can have an impact there just through your cultural practices in the office. And you can extend that to your company and the users of your product, right? You can start to think about what's painful for them and maybe taking the initiative, proposing something. Dog fooding, you know, dog, use your own stuff, what's awful about it. So there's some really find real problems. Number 2, position yourself to understand people. This is a big topic, but I think it's really interesting. How many people here, when they went to computer science school, officially or unofficially, were trained in psychology? High numbers. So maybe 5 hands, 6 hands. I think this is interesting because as engineers, we all are told that the first step to solving a problem is understanding it, right? Ironically, the way that you understand a problem is talking to people. Step 1. It's something that engineers have 0 training in. How do they know they're solving the real problem if they can't like unpack it? And we all know this, right? Like, business people, product people are really bad at saying what their problem really is, but we have a responsibility to be better at trying to get at what they're saying. Why are they saying it, right? So that's a simple example. Other 2 points on positioning yourself to understand people. I recommend looking for opportunities to break 2 things, right? We use our intellect a lot, our technical skill, but look for opportunities to break your mind, think new ways. I'll make 2 specific recommendations there. I recommend you read What Makes You Not a Buddhist, because it's a fascinating look at how our minds work. Not because you may be interested in being a Buddhist, but it is a very interesting book. I recommend that you look at Gödel's Theorem of Incompleteness. It's foundational to computer science, and it'll also lead you to a rat hole of questioning the things that we build our assumptions on as engineering. Namely, that mathematics and engineering can be complete and correct at the same time. You have to give up on one of them, which is a pretty uncomfortable place to be for most engineers who think ultimately we'll get there, one small step at a time. Nothing like that's actually possible. So the last thing I would just say, again, the invitation to commit yourself to solving real problems, look for opportunities, ways you can do that internally, inside your company, inside your communities, and bigger. And to realize, I'll close with a little anecdote that, again, one of the things that we've realized is we're still doing the same work. And I tell people, it's like we had a big floods in Boulder, huge floods, killed 12 people, and Boulder still has parts of the community that's wiped out. When we were doing that, there was a lot of work parties, to shovel shit and mud out of people's basements. And I tell people, it's like, if I ask one of you guys here, like, hey, do you want to come over to my house and shovel shit? Write Java, say. You would say, definitely not. If I said, hey, you're my friend, my house just got flooded, will you come over with a bunch of us, listen to music, eat pizza, drink beer, and shovel shit? Say, hey, I'm there, right? I'll help you out. So the reason that you're doing the work, it matters a great deal. And I think it can dull the edge of the pain and difficulty of actually being a software, just that subtle shift in intention and thinking about why you're doing something. And I'll close with just saying that, I mean, as a couple of the speakers here have said that, you know, real impact does start with simple acts of fundamentally being kind. Matt's is the greatest example. Like, look at how small of a thing it was for Matt's just to say Ruby's about being nice, I'm nice. Look at how many people he impacted through just that. Look at the different kinds of software and conversations that are had in the Ruby community versus other communities. It's quite possible. That's it. Any questions?
It's like the second part. Yeah, so you talk about like inspiration that help us to go through the way. So do you think that like probably your way, Matt's way, it was like the aim was to be not popular like a rock star, but popular to be possible to communicate with really a lot of people and to be known by a lot of people. Like, this is like the true aim. And this is why you are trying to communicate with all and do really useful stuff.
I agree with that statement completely. The reason I recommended reading the book, What Makes You Not a Buddhist, there's 4 chapters in that. There's 4 key things. It's like these things, if you believe in them, you're actually maybe something that you don't know that you already are. But the thing that's really interesting about it is that there is a rationalism behind ethics. People think those things are separate, and they're not. And I think there's a struggle that a lot of people really have to get to. There's a reason to be kind. You don't need to do this on faith or because somebody tells you to. You can actually find that there's actually a reason to be kind, to be nice, and to do the right thing. It actually makes sense. It rationally makes sense. So yes, I think that people who come from that foundation have that impact on the world. Matt's is a great example. Anything else?
Hello.
Hello.
You are nice. So, as I understood, open source helps to make influence on real life of so many of people. I want to be like you. Can you help me? That's all.
You mean you want to write more open source software?
No.
You'll have to elaborate on your goal then.
I want to make influence, impact.
You want to make impact. You don't want to write more open source software. I think I mean, this is going to be a deep philosophical answer, but I would say that all problems stem from 3 things: pain, fear, and ignorance. And when you start looking at that, you'll find that that goes pretty deep, and that where those things exist, you have a real opportunity to have positive impact. That's a little slippery, but. One more? Last question?
The last question, okay.
If you were to build an electronic government to fight the corruption in some country, how would you prevent it from becoming evil itself? Thanks.
That's a fucking fantastic question. So we're grappling with this question right now. Like, you know, it's hard to, I won't name names, I think it's a little sensitive, but I had a conversation with a solar light manufacturer, right? This example I said about girls being able to do homework. one of the things that they discovered in their research was another thing that happens when people can stay up late, where they couldn't before, is the men stay up late drinking with the same light. Maybe that's not so good for the women. There's an idea there's an idea, again, from Buddhism, that it's very difficult to help somebody, right? That it's actually really hard to know what to do to help somebody. There's a huge amount of hubris that exists in understanding the thing that will help that person. It's very easy to harm somebody instead of help them through your act. So, but I think that to this gentleman's question, I think the way that you mitigate against that is to make sure that your motivation is correct, because there's only so many things you can do. You have to do something with your life. You have to make a decision. You don't know, and that's okay. And so you can look at the same act, any act, you can take anything that a human being does, and the intention can be quite different. Like, if I hit you, if I'm violent against you, but I prevent you from jumping off a cliff and killing yourself, this is very different than if I hit you because I'm angry. And so the intention, it matters a great deal, and some people believe that that is the best protection against doing harm, is to make sure your motivation is correct.
Thank you, Ara. И перед тем, как начнется перерыв, сейчас Sweetla Systems, организатор этой конференции, разыграет призы.
Ты там работаешь, между прочим.
Да, забыл. Я уже думаю, что работаю где-то в другом месте. Так. Та-да-да-та-да-та-да-та-да. И что у нас там сейчас? Футболка, да? Футболка уходит. Пола уходит. Пола уходит мне, да. Пола уходит. Никита Вавилов на Rails Reactor.
Дальше.
Нету такого, да?
А может быть. Да, Ковалев.
Ковалев, сори, Ковалев. Есть такой, да? Церковно-приходская школа, 3 класса. Держи, так, да, принимай.
Это плакат с подписями всех спикеров этого года.
Самое ценное, да. Окей, продолжаем. Тан-та-та-та-тан. Вот какой-то плотненький. Дмитро. Да что же у всех программистов такой почерк? Беляк, Беняк. On up. Есть? Да, есть такой. Держи. Это тебе на память? Это нам, да? Ага. Плакат и Пола. Держи. Так, дальше идем. Так. О, отлично. Джига Антон. Беларусь. Есть такой, нет? Джига Антон. Давай, Джига Антон. Да. Пола и плакат твои. Поздравляем. Так. И наушники.
И массаж.
И массаж. На второй раз, на второй заход. Все, у нас перерыв 15 минут.